Welcome, class, to another interesting topic and another fascinating speaker that we have. Lou Prosperi is with us today, and he's going to talk to us about a few different projects and books he's written that focus on what we all can learn from Imagineering and from the Imagineering process. And so I don't spend too much time talking. I want to get right into it. Lou, welcome to the class and to the show. And to kind of bring us up to today, where we can then start talking about the books. Can you give us some background on to what was your introduction to Disney? Where does your fandom come from? And then take us up to today and how you got interested in, one, researching about, and then two, ultimately writing and talking about Imagineering and the Imagineering process. Thank you.
First, yeah, you're welcome. First of all, thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation. So in terms of my Disney fandom, I was born in the early 60s. So I grew up with the Disneyland TV show, The Wonderful World of Disney, Wonderful World of Color, or whatever it might have been called at the time, show. And so I was a general sort of Disney fan. And then I was definitely interested in the animated films, particularly the animation renaissance that was kicked off with The Little Mermaid. And in fact, on my second date with my wife, we ended up watching The Little Mermaid together on videotape at her house. And so I had been a Disney fan at a general sense through most of my life. One level or another, and we, as we go through high school and college, we sort of fade in and out of different fandoms just because of, the way things go. I was way more into comic books for a little while, or movies or music or whatever. But my real fandom sort of got spurred on my first trip to Disney World, which was on my honeymoon. My wife had been many times, but I had never been. And so my first trip was our honeymoon in May of 1993. And in fact, our very first day, the first day we got there, we were staying at the Polynesian Resort, and we went to Epcot first. And it was a rainy Sunday in May. And back then, that meant it wasn't crowded. Like, there were times when the parks weren't crowded as they are now. And so we literally walked on everything in Future World, like one after another. So we did Spaceship Earth, we did the Universe of Energy, we did World of Motion, Horizons, and then World of Motion, maybe even Body Wars and the Wonders of Life, and then a crossover to Journey into Imagination, and then eventually the Land and the Seas, the Living Seas. And at the time, I was working as a game designer in the adventure game industry, working on a pencil and paper role-playing game. The game's called Earthdawn, similar to Dungeons and Dragons, a typical, adventuring party, wizards and warriors and stuff. And so I was working in a creative field at the time. And, I had gone to college for music composition. And so I did a lot of music writing and arranging. So I had spent that time in a creative field. And so I had spent a fair amount of my time in creative endeavors of one sort or another. But when I got to Disney World, I saw creativity sort of personified in a way I had never experienced before. And the moment that it really struck me the most was in the original Journey into Imagination. There's a portion after you meet Figment and Dreamfinder, and after you leave the turntable and you start moving through the genres, there's a part where it talks about literature, and there's literally the word avalanche was carved of stone, and sort of it was like sculpted around a passageway. And I just remember seeing that, and just my eyes couldn't have been bigger. It was just so amazing. And to this day, Figment's one of my favorite characters. And but I wanted to think about how do they do this, and how can I apply what they do and how they do it to what I do as a game designer. Because I've always been a big believer in what actually Brian Collins, who I believe has participated in your class before, he's a former Imagineer, he calls creative cross-pollination, which is the application of principles and ideas from one field into another. And so I've, I used to listen to Tony Robbins, the motivational speaker, and one of the things he would say is, read outside your field, and you never know. Learning how a helicopter runs and works might help you run your business one day. You just can never tell. And so I came at this new expression of creativity with this: what is there I want to learn about this? How do they do this, and how can I apply some of it to what I do in the game design field? And so I went again in 1995 with my family to celebrate my parents' 40th anniversary. And then I didn't go again until 2005. It took a while. We had kids and life got in the way. But along the way, Disney Hyperion Editions, I think, published one of the first big books about Imagineering called Walt Disney Imagineering, a behind the ears look at how the magic is made. It's a big coffee table book. You may be familiar with it. And it started me to sort of piece together how they do this, and through that I sort of figured out the big pieces of their process. They do blue sky, and then they develop that, and then they do the detailed design, and then they finally do the construction. And so ever since I had that book, and even a little bit before that, I viewed that as a source of insight for the creative process and creativity. Then when I went back in 2005, I discovered that in the meantime, a whole lot other books had been written. And so I started collecting and looking for more insights and more ideas and more, stuff to learn, and just to learn a little bit more about it. So I went again in 2005, and then in 2010, and then I was back in 2011, I think, and then 13 and 14. And so I started to go a little bit more frequently. We actually had 2 trips planned in 2020, but both were canceled because some other thing came up that year. So, but along the way, I've amassed this Imagineering library where I've tried to learn more and more about how the Imagineers do what they do, and the principles behind it. And that has sort of led to my eventually to writing I've written 3 books about Imagineering specifically. So they're about Imagineering, but they're also about how to apply the principles that Imagineers use to other creative fields. So it's not just books about Disney, but it's also a book that you could, hopefully read and apply to your business, or apply to whatever it is you're doing. So that's sort of it in a nutshell.
Yeah, and thank you for that intro and background. And 2 quick notes. My favorite, at least Parks character, might be favorite Disney character, is Figment as well, because when I was a kid and met Figment, it was, hey, that's a cool looking dragon, and I met Figment when the walk around Dreamfinder was there. And so we got to interact with the puppet and everything. But then as you get older and you start to, think about what does he represent and how he represents imagination, and creativity being like imagination kind of put out for everyone else to see or consume.
Right.
And so it was just interesting that you to note that. And then I want to briefly ask about you said you grew up watching the Disneyland specials and the Disneyland weekly series, and it was as people who've seen those know, it was a regular occurrence for Walt Disney himself to kind of walk through Imagineering. And most people have probably seen the walkthrough where they're talking about the Pirates of the Caribbean, and they're talking about some of the bird animatronics and audio animatronics that are going to be in the Tiki Room and Haunted House. And then most people remember the famous video where he talks about Epcot for the first time. those kind of behind the scenes videos, um, how much do you think that impacted your fandom, but also interest in kind of delving more into not just what Disney is, but what the Imagineering segment or Imagineering section of Disney is? What kind type of impact do you think those had?
Well, I think if it did, it's more of a subliminal thing than an obvious thing. I have, I know I remember watching the show, but I only have a couple of very clear, distinct memories of particular shows that were on. Like, for instance, for whatever reason, I have a very clear memory and recollection of one called The Whiz Kid and the Mystery at Riverton, which
Mhm.
was about this kid inventor who ends up solving a mystery, in his town. It's just one of those, I think they showed it once and it was never on again, but I have a very clear recollection of it. I don't recall specifically, I can't remember a time specifically. Oh, I remember I was on my couch with my parents and I saw Walt Disney walk through Imagineering and talk to Mark Davis or any of that. So I don't know that it goes that far. I don't. And also, I would have been 3 or
Yeah.
4 when he died, so most of that hadn't really aired by the time I might have remembered it, or been watching it. Um, so yeah, I don't know. It may be there deep under the covers, so to speak, but not in a conscious way.
Yeah. Yeah. So then next you talked about, you got into why you got interested in Imagineering, and how you amassed your vast collection of Imagineering, books about Imagineering, and hard to get information about the segment, or the section. But then you also talked about how you wanted to use Imagineering to try to help you, and then further help others to see how can you apply these principles to in other portions of your life or other portions of your business, what have you. And you're not the or you're not the only person to do that. Imagineering is something that has been studied extensively. It is unto itself really one of those, like, kind of shining examples of creativity, but also communication and, um, organization. What do you think it is about Imagineering that makes so many people want to look for guidance from Imagineering, and how to improve their business, their life, what have you?
I think part of it is hopefully we're always looking to learn new
Mhm.
things, right? Whether conscious, and I think we are, whether we're conscious about it or not, whether or not you call yourself a lifelong learner, I think human beings are wired to try to learn new things. And I think we are also sort of wired to look for success as a model or a source for ideas, right? You don't look at, even though it's true we learn as much from our failures as we do from our success, you don't necessarily want to go and research what are the biggest Broadway musicals
Mhm.
flops ever and what are the lessons I can learn about that. Now there's plenty of lessons there, right? In fact, there's an interesting book about Disney theatrical productions that looks at 3 of their plays. One is The Lion King, one is Newsies, but the middle one is Tarzan, which was
Mhm.
not very successful, and it sort of explores a couple of the reasons why. So it's not to say that you don't want to look at failures for lessons there too, but obviously if you want to look for role models or insights, you want to look at success. And I think, with the exception of the handful of times where just certain attraction just doesn't jive with you, for the most part, it's very clear, I think, to me at least, that the Imagineers are successful at what they do, and they try to communicate an idea or a concept even with limited constraints, limited budget, whatever, they're very successful at immersing you in an experience and creating an emotional response in you and conveying a story to you. And so I think it's hard to deny their level of success and their level of expertise. And so anyone that you see who's doing, like, if you want to, when I was growing up, if you wanted to learn how to be a basketball player, you studied Larry Bird, right? Especially I'm from the Boston area, right? So, you look for exemplary examples. And so in this case, the Imagineers are so good at what they do. They're a natural source to turn to, like, they're so good, like they created Expedition Everest, like that's just an amazing experience. How do they do that? And just from a pure fandom, oh my God, I love that ride, I want to learn everything about it point of view, even that alone, just because you want to know about it may highlight some insight that you can use later off someplace else in your life too, right? Whether or not you go into it like, I want to learn how to be better at running meetings, and I want to use Expedition Everest as my example, right? Bizarre connection, but even if all you want to do is, I just love this ride, I want to know everything about it, you may learn like simple thing like they had to build the track and the mountain and the facility all sort of at once in sequence so that they could actually get it all done, or the way they did the rock work, with actually they built scaffolding into the mountain and had some of it had some pieces extend that they could put scaffolding on, and then they cut it off, and then they sort of put the mountain around it. And that's like just little things like that lead us to insights that we can use in other fields, whatever they might be, So I hope that's responsive. I hope that answers the question.
And also on Expedition Everest, that the reason the Yeti can't be fully removed and is because that's part of the foundation of the show building, and so you remove that part, well then you're compromising the rest of the show building and the integrity of the construction. And another thing that I find very, very interesting, because I love learning more about how the company, like the operation side of the company as well. I love the creative side of it. I love the operation side of it as well. That, so for instance, when something happens at or even the way they label their on stage and off stage areas, and how they kind of put on the show, and then everything happens behind the scenes. Or if you go to Walt Disney World, you don't see people walking in lands that don't belong there because they have the utilidors underneath. Like I just enjoy learning so much about the many different aspects of the company. And so on a broader level, not necessarily, I won't necessarily ask you why people are so interested in learning more about Disney and using Disney as examples, but for the company to essentially to not try to control the narrative all of the time and allow people to write books about certain sections, to have classes and podcasts and everything about that. It is very beneficial for the company, but it's also beneficial for everyone else.
Right. Yeah.
Why do you think that beneficial relationship exists between the company and all of their subsidiaries and the fans, and then moving from fans into using that information to benefit other areas?
Well, so first, I think I'm like you in that I'm fascinated by the company too. I've read plenty of books about, management change ups, Michael Eisner's book and Bob Iger's book and Disney War and some of those others. And I'm also, when I go to Disney World, I love the attractions, I love the parks, I love the lands, but I'm almost as fascinated by the logistics of everything as I am by the rest. Just how well run everything is and how efficient they are at moving people around and getting people from where they are from where they need to go. You know, the bus system, the boating, the monorail, all that is just fascinating to me. That the sort of industrial engineering side
Yeah.
of how the parks run is a fascinating subject. In terms of, you know, the sort of mutually beneficial relationship, I think, you know, I've talked to a handful of Imagineers, and I think everybody enjoys talking about what they do with people that care,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know, like, and so they enjoy, you know, I don't know if you've ever done this, but there's a dining event or thing you can do called Dine with an Imagineer or Lunch with an Imagineer. And you can have lunch with an Imagineer, and it's at the Hollywood Brown Derby at Hollywood Studios. And it's a very intimate affair that's an Imagineer and 8 people in a private dining room for like 2 hours.
Yeah.
So it's a really fantastic experience. And I think in doing that, and I think you also see this in the various Imagineer interviews that you'll see on a lot of podcasts or things, people enjoy talking about their work and what they do. And as long as it doesn't harm either party, you know, sort of like what you said about fandom in general, right? As long as, if you love something, as long as you're not hurting somebody along the way, there's no downside to it for either side, right? And so from Disney's point of view, you know, I can't imagine what possible harm there could be from somebody like me writing books about Imagineering, providing I don't slander them or, you know, or you know, it's not a negatively slanted thing. So I think that's part of it, you know. And so even at the individual level, we enjoy, you know, being appreciated for the work we do and talking about the work we do, and it just grows and grows and grows, you know. Like it's possible that some of the upper management at Imagineering don't like the fact that people write books and articles and podcasts about it, because they prefer to keep it behind wraps, because for many years it was pretty secretive what they did, right? You know, I don't think that's the case, because their website is far more explicit than it's ever been. They do those Disney park videos all the time as they have new things. So I think they've, you know, and even the Imagineering story, but also Imagineering in a Box. I don't know if you've seen that. It's an online course on Khan Academy as well as on their YouTube channel. I think recently Imagineering in particular has sort of embraced this. There's a desire for people to understand what we do and how we do it. And so we're going to sort of feed that, because, you know, you can watch the videos about the making of Animal Kingdom that they did and the making of Expedition Everest and all that stuff, but it's not the same as going and writing it and experiencing it. And they know that. So all it is all that sort of stuff is just promotion and just more enticement for the guests to come and check it out. So I think that's kind of where it's at. I think they view it as beneficial because it's good PR, you know.
And sorry, go ahead.
And they don't, you know, they don't want to get in the way of anyone who's expressing their love for what they do.
And that's what I was going to say, is that the one of the, I guess, strongest signs of being highly identified with something is you wanting to learn more about it,
right?
And you wanting to, you know, produce content about it. One thing we do in this class is we also talk about fan-made content. So we talk about people who make short movies and people who make radio dramas and write books, sort of fictional books about the characters. And it's, you know, that's part of fandom is, and so yes, to the brand, it is all promotion, right? I mean, it is just additional ways to engage with the brand that people really, really enjoy. So I want to, I am, as I said before we started recording, I am reading one of your books, your third book. So to get into the books, can you tell us about the books you've written and the kind of a brief synopsis about each, because then I have several questions about the book that I'm reading now and the approach that you took, because it's fascinating.
Sure. So I mentioned earlier, I had this sort of obsession about learning more about Imagineering and how I might apply it to other fields. And I had identified sort of in broad strokes the process that they use. And one day I was on a business trip to California, to San Francisco, and I had with me Jason Searle's Pirates of the Caribbean, From the Magic Kingdom to the Movies. It's a book. Jason Searle is a former Imagineer who has written a number of books about the parks, particularly about pirates and the Haunted Mansion. And so I'm reading this book about Pirates of the Caribbean, and he's actually quoting another book, a book called Disneyland Inside Story by a former Imagineer named Randy Bright, who was talking with Blaine Gibson, the Disney legendary sculptor who sculpted the partner statue, and as well as the Haunted Mansion characters in the Hall of Presidents, and about creating readable scenes. That we have to create in a dark ride. You only have a few seconds to communicate an idea, so we have to create a readable scene. And I was doing a lot of training at the time. In my job, I was doing a lot of training, and I thought to myself, that's what we do when we develop training materials and we create we grab a screenshot or provide an illustration or a diagram. We're simplifying a complex subject. We're making it readable, like the Imagineers make a scene readable in their scene. So that got me thinking, and that sort of tied into the process, though this was not a part of the process. This was sort of something that they did. So then I thought, well, what else do they do? So I started reading through my library again, sort of with this question in the back of my mind: what are the things they do that might apply to instructional design? And that was my focus at the time. So I initially developed a presentation with 10 or 12 principles of Imagineering. And I did an internal presentation from some folks on my own team about applying them to instructional design. And then following that, I sort of fleshed it out a little bit more, and I came up with 15 principles that arrange themselves into a pyramid. Well, they didn't arrange themselves, but when I looked at them carefully and aligned them, they formed a pyramid. So there's 5 foundational principles, then 4 other related, and 3 related to each other, and 2 and 1. So I developed another presentation, a more elaborate one. And along the way, I had also fleshed out their process a little bit. And so I developed a presentation that I delivered at a instructional design and training development conference held by an organization that no longer exists, the Society for Advanced Learning Technologies, or SALT. And it was in Orlando, happily enough. So I ended up going to Orlando to present this, to deliver this presentation about applying Imagineering to instructional design. It turns out that as I did my dress rehearsal sort of the night before, I realized that I wouldn't fit in the time allotted, so I had to cut a whole piece out of the presentation. I cut the process piece out, and I focused on the pyramid. And it was pretty well received, and that trip I got to go to Disney World, and that was kind of cool. But all along, I had this thought that if I broaden this a little bit more and maybe talked about how these principles also apply to game design or something, maybe there's a book here. And so I started outlining and drafting little bits here and there, and then life got in the way, and I would get distracted by something shiny and I would start doing something else. But then I get an email. And when I did this presentation, I posted a PDF version of the presentation on Scribd and Scribd.com and slideshare.net, a couple different places out there. And I got an email from the publisher of the guy who runs Theme Park Press. And he said, I found your Imagineering presentation, and I think it's great. And I think if you broadened it a little bit and maybe talked about game design, I think there's a book here. So he had the exact same sort of thought I did about the content. So I got in touch with him, and that's sort of the birth of the first book, the Imagineering Pyramid. And originally it was the Imagineering Toolbox, which is now the name of the series. And the original intent for the first book was to talk about this pyramid of 15 principles, but also the process that the Imagineers go through when they, say, we need a new ride in Fantasyland, we need a new attraction in Fantasyland. How do they go from there to opening Seven Dwarfs Mine Train years later? What is the process? So I worked out an outline, I started writing it. Along the way, I realized that I had too much to say to fit in one book if I was going to do both. So we agreed to take the process out. So the first book is the Imagineering Pyramid, and it's about using Disney theme park design principles to develop and promote your creative ideas. And one of the sort of fundamental premises of the first two books is that creativity is something we all need and all do. There's a creative aspect to just about everything. A filing clerk who comes up with a new way of doing what they do is applying creativity to their job. And in a way, they're applying Imagineering to their job because they're taking technical know-how and creative imagination to do it, which, that's the definition of Imagineering, right? And so the goal of the book is to illustrate these 15 principles with an eye of specifically not just how they're used in the parks, but what is the underlying principle at work and how you can apply it to other fields. So for example, the bottom tier starts with, it all begins with a story. So we know story is very important at Disney, and it's sort of the fundamental building block of everything they do in Imagineering. They identify a story and not necessarily a narrative, right? Not a, act 1, act 2, act 3, rising tension, denouement, falling action, any of that stuff necessarily, but a story as in the underlying premise on which an attraction is built. And that informs all of their decisions making going forward. So whenever they decide what color should we make the walls, well, this is a haunted mansion, so we don't want it to make them bright yellow. We want them to, a very basic example, but still, to the point. And so for each of these principles, we look at what the Imagineers do and how they do it, and then what it might mean in another field. And then after going through all 15, then I look at specifically how they might apply to game design, because that's a field I had worked in, how they might apply to instructional design, which was the origin of all this. I felt that was a natural thing. And then how they apply to management and leadership. And not only in terms of how a manager does their job, but if a manager is leading a team that's doing creative work, how to facilitate these techniques and principles as well. So that's the first book. And I could talk through all 15 principles, but we may get to some more of them later anyway. And we'll probably touch on a handful of them as we go through. So then the second book was the process. And so what started as part 2 of this bigger book became a whole book on itself. And it's the Imagineering process. And it's, again, using the Imagineers theme park design process to bring your own ideas to life. And so it explores how they do what they do. And so they start with a need of some sort. Some party within the organization identifies a need, whether that's the operations people say we need more capacity, or it's a creative need, or whatever it might be. Somebody says we need a new ride in Fantasyland, we need a new thing in Animal Kingdom, whatever it might be. Then they move to Blue Sky, where they develop a vision for that, to address that need. And when they do the needs too, also is important to point out, they also identify constraints and requirements too, right? And so, we need a new ride in Fantasyland. Well, that means it has to fit the overall themes of Fantasyland. You can't have a science fiction thing in Fantasyland. If we're getting a new attraction in the Asia section of Animal Kingdom, we know it's not going to be also a space thing or a dinosaur thing. It's going to have to be something based on Asian culture. So they identify the requirements and then the constraints. And some of that is budgetary and practical, but some of it's also creative, right? So then they move to Blue Sky. How do they develop? They develop a vision for what to meet that need. And we've all heard about Blue Sky in terms of Imagineering. That's sort of their brainstorming process. Once they've identified that, then they move to, and this is, I should say, this is a very distilled and simplified version of the process, because it's a very, very elaborate process with lots of moving parts. I broke it down to 7, and I think I distilled it pretty well. Then they move into concept development, where they actually flesh it out and say, all right, so for example, we need a ride, we need a new attraction in Asia, in Animal Kingdom. okay, how about a runaway train ride through the mountains of the Himalayas where you encounter the Yeti? That's their vision. These are my words, by the way, these are my description of this. So then they move to concept development. So what does that mean? Well, then why is there a train in the first place? Why? What is the Yeti? What is the story? So they flesh it all out and decide what all do they need to build? What do they need to do? And that's where a lot of concept art comes from, and the artwork we see. What do they need to what do we need to build? Then they move to design, which is how do we build this? We have this cool model and this cool concept picture of this mountain, but how do we build this and make how do we make a roller coaster run through it and an animatronic Yeti and all this stuff? And then they finally build it once they've done, and design is sometimes called schematic in their world, where they do blueprints and plans and all the technical detail that they need. Then they move into construction, where they actually do the building part. Along the way, they use models of all sorts of different types. Physical scale models, digital models. There's a great video with I don't know if he's still with Imagineering. At the time, he was a VP of Imagineering in Orlando named Jack Blitch. He did a presentation at the NASA Technology Summit one year, and he demonstrated how the Imagineers use a technology called building information modeling, or BIM, it's called, in the construction industry, to, instead of doing all these drawings on paper, they actually do all of their illustrations, not only the show illustrations, but the technical illustrations in software. And they put it all together in this model, and it allows them to see it, and they can actually, program it so they show how it would be built over time. Like we talked about Expedition Everest being built over time, right? This shows like they lay the cement, they lay some of the steel work, they lay the tracking, then they do the next level and how they do all that. But it also shows them if there's a clash. So one thing that happens from time to time, or has happened, is the architectural and structural people do one set of designs, the show people do another, and when they get to the field, all of a sudden, a piece of structural steel sticks out 6 inches from the end of the rock work. So how do you arrange that? So they are able to detect that in the computer model. So, and then once they've constructed it, then they do opening. They do what I call the epilogue, where they open it and they do, sometimes soft openings and cast member previews. And then once it's open, they also do constant ongoing evaluation. And there's a group within Imagineering called Show Quality Standards, whose job it is to go out into the parks and experience things from the guest point of view and look for things that need to be refurbished or things that need to be replaced or changed. So the second book is the Imagineering process, and it basically drills into more detail than I just did about all those 7 steps, and also does the same thing. It looks at them in generic terms, but also game design, instructional design, and management and leadership. So then after writing the first book, in addition to moving on to the second, one of the things I didn't feel I was as successful as I could have been, was in talking about the principles of the Imagineering Pyramid in a sort of with regards to specific other fields. My original outline had included a whole chapter about Imagineering communication, and it didn't fit as the book changed as I wrote it. It just didn't fit, so I let it go. But I decided I wanted to revisit the principles of the pyramid with a specific focus on communication, and that's where the third book, the one you're reading, comes in. It's focused specifically on how the Imagineers tell their stories, because that's my metaphor for how the Imagineers communicate ideas. And so what that book does is it's a tour through the Magic Kingdom. It's written as a business fable, and what I mean by that, so business fables are basically fictional stories that offer insights and lessons in areas of business or personal development. Some popular examples, the 1 Minute Manager is an example of that. The Go-Giver, I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but a very popular one from more recent years is a book called Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson. And one of my favorites, actually, the one that mostly inspired the book, is called Inside the Magic Kingdom. That tells a story of a group of people who go to Disney World for a seminar workshop where they learn about customer satisfaction. In my case, what I wanted to do was I wanted to just talk about these principles again from a point of view of communication, but I also wanted to show the reader how these principles work, not just tell them that Cinderella Castle uses forced perspective, or that Pirates of the Caribbean uses a principle I call readability, the ability to see, that thing I talked about with Blaine Gibson. I wanted to illustrate it and show it. So I decided to write it as a fictional story, as a business fable, where a group of friends are visiting Walt Disney World and they find themselves on a tour of the Magic Kingdom being led by a former Imagineer who shows them how the Imagineers tell their stories as a way to illustrate how they can better communicate in their own jobs. And so in the introduction of this story, these friends are together, they're having dinner, and they're talking about how, they're high school friends who don't get together very often, and they deliberately go to vacation together because they want to choose to be together, not only get together when one of their friends or parents dies. Like sometimes we only get together with people from our past under bad circumstances. And so they decide to do it more deliberately. And they're talking about their lives and their work, and they all are struggling in one way or another with communicating an idea to somebody. And so one of them, who's a Disney travel agent, sort of recognizes that and arranges for this tour. And the whole point again is, here's how the Imagineers tell their stories, and here's how you can use the same principle in your work. So when the Imagineers use a weenie, like at the, Cinderella Castle is the classic example of a weenie, which is a visual magnet, right, that draws the audience in. What does that mean outside of the parks? Well, it's about grabbing your audience's attention, capturing their interest so they want to learn more. In the field I work in as a technical writer, that could be as simple as, thoughtfully written, catchy headings in a table of contents. It could be as simple as that, right? Or in an email, maybe it's about writing a catchy email subject line so the person at the other end wants to read it as opposed to file it away. So that book is basically this walking tour through the Magic Kingdom, where the former Imagineer, shows them how these principles all work with vivid examples so they can see them at work. And it was a lot of fun to write that way. I got to spend a lot of time looking at the maps of the Magic Kingdom, spent a lot of time watching YouTube videos, as well as Google has some street views of Magic Kingdom. So I actually walked through the park several times to see it from that sort of point of view, oh, this is where the fence begins, and this is where the wall ends, and this is where all those details. I wanted to make sure they were right. Attention to detail is one of the Imagineers principles, so I didn't want to miss that one, obviously.
So
and that's sort of where the third book came from.
It's so like where the first two books are very, it's seemingly technical in nature. The third book is that mixture of, and I should say I'm reading the third book, so my impression of the first two books is coming from what you said. But that third book is I'm glad you talked about and told us what a business fable is, because when we were talking before we recorded, it's almost like it's this radio drama or even an instructional video that you might watch that has a story built around it to make it more engaging or creative. And so it's a really, really fun read. And if I may, for being someone who you describe yourself as a technical writer, it's extremely creative, and having like the conversations and everything. We talked about a few of those before. So it's very, very well done. And I'm glad that that's the one I started with, because it's that mixture again of like this, here's how things are done, and here's all these kind of entertaining, engaging stories and quibbles and everything amongst the participants.
Right.
And I'm also glad you mentioned how you researched that, because that was the next thing that I was actually going to ask is, aside from videos and Google Earth and everything, did you ever, when you were writing, did you go walk the parks? And if when you've been back after you've written the book, Are there things that catch your eye because you've written the book that may not have caught your eye before writing the book?
Yes. So I started writing this one in January of 2019.
Okay.
I had been in June of 2018, and I was going back in June of 2019. So I was more than halfway through, I think, in June of 2019 when I went again. And that time I, spent a couple hours one day taking pictures of the specific principles, because I knew I might eventually do a presentation about it. I wasn't sure I would include them in the book, but I wanted to have photographic reference, right? And at least one instance, my recollection of the area was wrong, and I had to change a couple of the descriptions of the layout of some things because I got there and I'm like, oh, that's not what I wrote about. I guess I need to change this. But so then to your point, I did pay closer attention to some of those other things to make sure that it was, correct as of that time. I mean, one of the challenges is the parks are constantly changing, and so at the end there's an afterword that basically says this was written based on summer 2019.
Yeah.
So, like, for instance, they make a point to say that Galaxy's Edge hasn't opened yet, and a couple other things. But yes, so I live in the Boston area, and I can't get down there that often to do frequent visits. But when I was in the Magic Kingdom that last trip, I was paying very close attention to how things were laid out and how things were, and to try to make sure I had the overall layout of things correctly, or that I had seen, sometimes even those Google Street Views is a little misleading from time to time, and I don't recall. I think actually one of the principles that we talk about, I'll just spoil it, is you haven't got there quite yet, is transitions. Okay. And how the Imagineers manage transitions from scene to scene or land to land. And one of the best examples of that, particularly land to land, is the transition and change between Liberty Square and Fantasyland over near the Haunted Mansion. And so when I was there taking pictures, I'm pretty sure that the pictures helped inform that chapter. I mean, I knew I was going to write a little bit about it, but I decided to go into greater detail about one specific element about how that transition works, and it's the pillars that hold up that overpass. And so I don't know how closely you've looked at it, and if you've read any of the Imagineering field guides, these little pocket books, little books like that, they're called the Imagineering Field Guide to the Magic Kingdom or to Epcot or whatever. They're by an Imagineer named Alex Wright. They're a fantastic reference. There's so much detail and so much information about Imagineering hidden inside these seemingly little pocket books, right? And he specifically talks about this transition. And one of the things that the Imagineers do is they use architectural elements from the other land on each side. So as you approach from Liberty Square, there's actually stonework that's reminiscent of the castle on the Liberty Square side. And there's woodwork and ironwork from Liberty Square on the Fantasyland side. So it's like a visual cross dissolve in a film, and you don't even really notice it. Well, the pillars that hold up that overpass also do that. So on the Liberty Square side, they're round, wooden, colonial style pillars. And on the Fantasyland side, they're square, stonework, castle-like pillars. And as you walk through them, they literally, if you're coming from Liberty Square, the round colonial pillars fill your field of vision, and as you move closer, they move out of your field of vision, and the stone ones fill in, and it's literally like a literal cross dissolve. And so I took pictures of those, and then I think those pictures helped me rewrite that section, or I might not have even had gotten to that section yet, to really dig into detail to show a very specific example of how this transition and cross dissolve kind of thing works. So I definitely, paid closer attention, and I can't wait to go again, quite honestly, to look even closer at some of the stuff that I had seen and I had described, but I still want to go look again, just.
And one of the things that I really enjoy looking for the details and hidden details whenever
Mm.
I go. And a real quick example of that, I didn't know, I was listening to one of the walking tours that Lou Mangello has done, where he talks about the transition from Fantasyland to Liberty Square, really representing this transition from kind of the period of times those were set as well,
Mm.
transitioning into the colonial times. And one of the things that I I regularly go into the Columbia Harbor House when I'm there.
Sure. Right.
And, you know, one of the signs, on the signs, it has the picture of what served there and kind of the detail that a lot of people who would have been living during the colonial days would have needed those pictures because they couldn't necessarily read the words that were written on the
Right.
sign. And
Right.
it's all these details, and the one you just described about the transition, because it is, when you're walking, you think of, you hear the music, and
Mhm.
then you slowly hear the music maybe start to turn, and then it's all of a sudden new music, and you don't catch it. You don't
Right.
catch where was that point where I just left one land and now I'm in this land. Like now I feel totally engrossed in this land, or like, you know, in this place. And so it's so interesting that you go through that. And that's always been something that's really interesting to me about, especially the parks, is you can go to the parks, and if you don't know any of that, and you're not interested in knowing any of that, you're going to go and you're going to have a great time. But if you are someone who wants to go and see those details, then you're going to learn that when you walk from the hub over to Liberty Square, you're walking over a river that is, or a body of water that is representative of you transitioning into that area. When you're walking through um, Frontierland, you're walking through kind of that span of almost about a century
Mhm.
of like what it would have been like to live in, you know, Western expansion, and from the Mississippi River over into kind of newer, or I guess more modern, like San Francisco and everything.
Mm.
And so you get to see those type of details if you want them. So they tell their stories on so many different levels that you can have that. And this isn't to say anything about anyone who doesn't want to see the details, but you can have that, what's available on the surface level,
Mhm.
and you're going to have an amazing time. And if you want to know why people don't walk in the middle of Liberty Square, then you can get that too if you want to get into that detail.
Right. Sure.
Um, and so on that, is there a particular thing that you maybe is your favorite or stands out to you the most? That's one of those subtle details that you're going to miss unless you're wanting to look for, but when you see it, just adds to your experience. Is there something, or two or three things that kind of stand out to you that really helps you do that?
Yeah, there's a couple that come to mind. One is one thing I want to go, the next time I go, I want to pay closer attention to it. I want to see if I could get in at rope drop and run there and get pictures, is the Diamond Horseshoe
Mm-hmm.
and where it abuts up next to Frontierland, because that to me is an even more subtle uh, work of transition than some of the others. So technically, strictly, the Diamond Horseshoe is in Liberty Square. And as you move, as you walk from, say, Hall of Presidents, past the courtyard, the flags, and past the Liberty Tree Tavern, you come across the Diamond Horseshoe. And its architecture is very similar, very reminiscent of colonial style architecture. But it's also just got enough details that look Frontierland like. And so I think if you are coming from Liberty Square towards Frontierland and you see on your left, you see the Diamond Horseshoe blend into sort of, the fort
Mhm.
walls in the back, it fits very well. Likewise, if you're coming from Frontierland, you see, and you're next to the frontier, the fort looking stuff, and you see the Diamond Horseshoe, it looks like it kind of fits, but it also leads you back into Liberty Square. I think
Mhm.
that's a very subtle but pretty cool one. The, the other the other thing I like that I would say is one I just sort of discovered and identified and talked about in the third book is the use of specific theming in Frontierland to distinguish between the two mountains that are next to each other.
Okay.
So, when we talk about theming, generally there's sort of land level theming, big prod things like you won't see polished steel in Frontierland, but you will in Tomorrowland, and so Frontierland overall has this rustic look, wood fences, natural materials. But if you look at Splash Mountain and Big Thunder Mountain next to each other, and you look at the details of, say, the doorways and the windows. Like if you look at Splash Mountain and you see the doorway and window that are embedded in the wood, in the dirt, or even the doorway to the Briar Patch shop, the woodwork, which is plaster or fiberglass, by the way, it's not real wood because they need to last for years and years and years.
Mhm.
But it's designed and painted and treated to look as if it came out of an animated film. If you walk 100 feet over to Big Thunder Mountain, all that woodwork is designed and treated and created to look real, like
Mhm.
it's from the real world. And it's just a very subtle distinction. You barely notice it if you're not really
Yeah.
looking for it. But if you do, you see that all of Splash Mountain is sort of an animated film brought to life. Even if you look at the Briar Patch, the briars aren't giant lifelike real briars, they're animated briars, manifested in 3 dimensions. Whereas Big Thunder Mountain, all the architecture and all the structures are far more real, quote, realistic in terms of their structure and their appearance and their look. So that's another sort of level of detail that I very much appreciate. Just, the two of them are right next to each other, but these tiny little distinctions in theming help tell the story and help reinforce the story of each.
Yeah, and I didn't know about the Golden Horseshoe. I didn't know that it was technically part of Liberty Square. So the next time that I go, that's something I'll be on the lookout for as well. And the second point um, about wanting things in Splash Mountain to look like they came from an animated movie, as opposed to wanting them to look real when you're over at Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. I think it's that it'll also be very, very interesting and I guess ahead of the curve for them when when Splash Mountain is rethemed
Mm-hmm.
to Princess and the Frog, and
Right.
seeing how that process takes place, because I think now, because you mentioned it earlier, how Imagineering and Imagineers plans and planning are much more available today than they ever were pre-internet. People can get on and they're analyzing um, the they're analyzing the patents that they filed, and they're analyzing the construction plans, and again, all of that is just a sign of fandom, and it's the wanting to do that and wanting to gather more information about it and talk about it and make your people's fan theories and everything. That's all a sign of how identified we all are with this. Um, and so I think those things are really, really interesting. And I also think right now, and over the next however long this retheming process takes, we all will be able to see that in real time, how creative the Imagineers are and how creative that process is when they are given kind of carte blanche. They're given, the
Mm.
resources to be able to do what they need to do.
Yeah. It'll so if,
Go
so
ahead.
if you don't mind, it'll be interesting to see if they want to retain that animated film brought to life aesthetic with Princess and the Frog, because it's notably different than the animated portions of Song of the South, right? So it'll be interesting to see. One other point about that, I just recently learned that apparently Tony Baxter is actually going to be consulting and working on the retheme of the property that is Splash Mountain that will become themed of something else. So that is excellent news for anyone who's paying attention to that. Should be very pleased with that, because you know that somebody who cares deeply about all of the things that you care about as a Disney fan is right there with you. You know?
And the, you know, stretching back to kind of the original story of the inception of that ride, and him being the one to talk about reusing in Disneyland, reusing the animatronics from America Sings, and how that was kind of developed, and then the behind the scenes story also of how you got the name Splash Mountain in the first place, you know, like combining Michael Eisner wanting to promote the movie Splash from Touchstone, and then that was kind of the compromises. Well, we'll call it Splash Mountain, you know. So 2 more things on the books, and then as I said, we finish up with some rapid questions. Yours are going to be a little bit longer because as you've been talking, I've been making notes and adding 2 or 3 more things. But 2 quick questions about the book. One is when your characters in the 3rd book are walking down Main Street, USA, they're talking about, and you name some and explain some of the names on the windows. And it's this incredible story of, you know, when you walk up, and you mentioned the tunnel also, it's supposed to look like a theater, the entrance to a theater, or the lobby to a theater. And when you walk in, you see Walt Disney's name first on the train station, and then you walk in and you walk down Main Street, USA, and you see all of these names, and then the last name you should see, if you look in a particular direction, is Walt Disney again, and how that's supposed to be representative of credits at the beginning or the end of a movie, and the director being first and last shown, things like that. But another thing that they do with that is those are all tributes to real people that have helped either the parks, they've worked in the company, they've been instrumental to the company in some way. So I wanted to ask, did you apply any of those principles in your book? I mean, the characters' names or their backgrounds or their professions. Did you kind of draw any inspiration from people in your life that represent those names or professions or anything? And you don't have to go too in depth.
No, it's okay. Actually, yes. So a couple of things. One quick one: the names of the kids who don't play a big role. They're only at the beginning, at the end, really. Were named for my children as well as some friends who came with us on the trip in July 2019. So that's where and ironically, I wrote them, when I first wrote them, I wrote placeholders, child A, child B, C, whatever it was, right? And then I just did a search and replace. I said, child A is Samantha, child B is Nathan, whatever. And those are my kids. And then Sophia and Emma were the other 2. And ironically, my daughter ended up with a lot of the very sarcastic lines, but they fit her very well. Some of the other characters, so the character of Judy, who is the travel agent, is directly inspired by a friend of mine, Judy LaPlante, who is a Disney travel agent. She was an early reader of the book, and she, you know, is a good friend of mine. And so she's directly. Some of the other names are from people that I know. So for instance, the name Mark is the CEO of a small software company. Well, I happen to know a gentleman named Mark who's the CEO of a small medical device company. Right. Kim, who in the book is his wife, was the original name actually was inspired by the character of Brent who is a superintendent of schools. Our former superintendent of schools was a woman named Kim.
Okay.
And I don't remember where Allison came from. Just a name that came up.
Yeah. I really like those details of like, and I think it's also a sign of creativity that you as the writer gets to have the opportunity, but also takes the opportunity to kind of draw on, you have your hidden Mickeys, if you will, in the book. Everybody gets to kind of say, well, this was inspired by this or that, which I think is really cool. With your first two books, and correct me if I'm wrong, with your first two books, because they are written, as you said, again, kind of technically, to get those technical aspects of it, do you find that the readers of those books tend to be people that are working in businesses, and maybe they're reading them as a way to learn and to help out in those businesses, and also the readers of the third book, do you find that that's the same audience, or is it a slightly different audience because of the way that you're telling it? You're kind of telling it almost like you are telling this fictional story, but you're using very real events as they pertain to the business and what the lessons that can be learned.
Well, I think the audience for the first is, well, it's mixed. I mean, obviously, I sort of hoped that it would. So for the first one in particular would draw Disney park fans in general, Imagineering fans in general, but also sort of business people, or it was definitely written towards how to be more creative, and as sort of this business creativity book. The first two definitely were. One is things you do to be creative. The other is how to take an idea from I need a thing to how to make it. So those are definitely targeted that way at sort of, and I love books like that myself. So I was kind of writing the books I wanted to read, if you will, right?
Yeah.
The third book, what's interesting is I wrote it as a business fable. The intent was to we all have problems we all have challenges, we all have things we need to communicate. Here are some ideas about how you can tell your story more effectively, tell a story the Walt Disney World way, because who's better at telling a story really than the Imagineers? I realized after I wrote it that even without that stuff, it's still a pretty fun little vicarious trip through the Magic Kingdom, particularly given the timing, since so many of us can't get there because of the pandemic and things. It's kind of a nice little reminder of what it feels like to walk through the Magic Kingdom if you've been there before. The intended target audience of all was on the business side.
Okay.
So, like, I believe there's lots to learn from Imagineering, and we can all do better at what we do by looking at these things. But I also hoped, to get the Disney fans as well, obviously, because
Well, and I think you've reached that. You've reached that goal, because as we talked about, if you are someone who wants more detail and wants kind of those behind the scenes things, or even on a certain level, like those trivia points that you could talk about with your friends and you can point out while you're in the parks, the books hit that, and then you can also take it further, and as you point out, this is how you can use these to help in your future endeavors, future and current endeavors. So I think they're fascinating. Are there plans for future projects, or what are future projects that you have planned?
So I have a couple other projects that have been cooking in my head, neither of which really ties into the same model as this apply principles to outside. They're just other things I kind of feel I want to write. One is what I call a fictional history of Epcot, the way Walt wanted to build it.
Okay.
Which is, imagine we're in the year 2022 and we're celebrating the 40th anniversary of Epcot, but it's the Epcot that Walt talked about in the Epcot film. And how did that happen? And what is it like? And that sort of stuff. And again, written as a fictional history, maybe not as a story, but written as if you picked up a book about it. Like, imagine you're living in the world where that happened and you could pick up a guidebook about it, or a commemorative book about it that tells how it was built and that sort of stuff. So that's one, which I have sort of mixed. I want to do it, but I'm not sure it will be. I hope it's well received. I don't want to in any way disrespect the people that made different decisions. You know, I don't want to say that Marty Sklar and those folks made the wrong choice. It's not at all. It's, wouldn't it be cool if we could imagine what might have happened?
Yeah.
You know, and not saying Walt lived longer. I don't want to, you know, step on any toes of anybody. And I know how passionately people feel about all of this. But that's one. The other one is a deeper look at some other principles or Imagineering principles, not so much about how to apply them to other fields, but just how they work. And it's more about, so my working title, which maybe starting with the title is odd, but is reading between the rides and the journey from master planning to reassurance, and looking at how the Imagineers create these environments, not just attractions, but lands and environments that are so nurturing and reassuring to us.
Yeah.
You know, one theme that you read about, if you read a bunch of Imagineering, you read John Hench, who is a legendary Imagineer. He talks about the architecture of reassurance. And there's a great book that was written as part of a museum exhibit from years ago called Designing Disney Imagineering and the Architecture of Reassurance. And it's about how the design of the parks reassure the audience and guests that the world is going to be okay. You know, the world is, it's going to be okay. You know, like just recently I listened to a podcast interview on a podcast called the Themed Attraction Podcast, hosted by two gentlemen from the Storyland Studios, which is a themed entertainment design company, Mel McGowan and Freddie Martin. And their guest was Jason Searle, the author I mentioned earlier from the Pirates of the Caribbean book. And one of the things he said at the end of the interview was he's looking forward to, you know, he feels, and I really believe that theme parks are going to come back big when we're able to go back to them, because they're going to offer people three things that we all need. We need comfort, we need escape, and we need reassurance. You know, he pointed out that, you know, in a previous struggle, like say World War II, where there was a lot of rationing and a lot of challenges, you could still go to the movies with people. Like during this pandemic, we couldn't even go to the movies to escape, to see stuff. We could watch stuff at home, but it's not the same. Like the whole social element was sort of taken away from us at a fundamental level. And so this other project sort of explores the way the Imagineers create an emotional response in the audience and how they create these environments of reassurance. I'm still a little nebulous in some parts, but it could be a fascinating sort of exploration. Plus, I want to look at a couple of things I haven't been able to really look at in my other books, which are, you know, master planning, something called area development, where they focus on the spaces between the things. Like, you know, when you decide to put two attractions next to each other, what do you do in the space in between, and how they look at that, as well as placemaking, you know, how they develop these detailed places. And then this concept of heightened reality, you know, where Main Street USA is this sort of idealized, heightened version of 19th century to 20th century Main Street. And how all that sort of contributes to these environments, and how you can, you know, sort of to what we were talking about before about the attention to detail. You know, you or I probably could go to Magic Kingdom and spend a day and not go on a single attraction and still feel as fulfilled and as energized and cool as we might if we hit all the mountains and, you know, all the other stuff.
maybe even feel more depending on how crowded it is. And if you're
Right.
waiting hours to get on a ride,
Right,
you
it's
might.
true enough. So those are the
Um,
things I'm thinking about. We'll see if and when they come about. Lately, I've been focusing most of my my sort of Imagineering time, if you will, on sharing ideas about how to apply Imagineering to the field I'm in now, currently technical communication and technical writing, presenting at conferences and online conferences these days. But and I just did a class with the Society of Technical Communication about applying Imagineering to technical writing.
okay.
So I've been doing some of that lately.
Very, very cool. And all of those projects sound incredibly interesting, and remind me when we stop recording, I need to send you with your first idea. I'll send you over a link or to a podcast where Benjamin Lancaster, who's talked in the class before, he does a radio drama based on the prototype world of tomorrow, and it kind of
Interesting.
is people living in what was going to be the original Epcot, and kind of their stories and things like that.
Oh, that's cool.
And then to the second point, you talk about that feeling of reassurance, and it reminds me that when Mickey Mouse was originally being drawn, and some of the iterations that Mickey Mouse went through was one to make his face a little more round, so it was more welcoming to people. And it also reminds me that it's a little harder to see now because of all the changes at the park, but you could still, if you know what you're looking for, you can still see it on Google Maps. If you look at a aerial view of Hollywood Studios, there is the Mickey face, the three intertwining circles or connected circles. And so it reminds me of all of that. So those are really, really interesting things. Before we get to the rapid questions, is there anything else you think would be interesting for anybody watching or listening to know about kind of the Imagineering process?
Wow. So it's complicated. It's a very involved process, and what I've learned is when you ask a question of an Imagineer about how does blah work, very often the answer is it depends. It's a very iterative and flexible process that very rarely, aside from when they reproduce an attraction from one park to another, when they're doing new things, it's virtually never the same twice, just because if nothing else, the technology has changed a little bit. If nothing at all, they can use different types of sound system or different lighting or different animatronic technology I find it fascinating. And I think there's a lot to learn from it. I mean, I've said this before, but there's a single message, which is, I think we all practice creativity in one way or another. And what I have found generally, I've bought a fair number of books about creativity too, but what I find is they fall into two categories. One is how to have more ideas, which is good, but ideas, one of the things I talk about in my second book is I think ideas are a paradox. Because they're both at the same time the most important part of the creative process and the least important part of the creative process. Because they're the most important part because until you have an idea, you can't proceed, right? But at the same time, ask most creative people and they have more ideas they could possibly ever implement. And it's the implementation that's hard. Ideas are easy. It's making them come to life that's hard. And so in some ways, obviously without the idea to build Disneyland, we wouldn't have Disneyland. So that was cool. But let's build a park doesn't get you very far until you have the people to do it, right? So there's this sort of paradox about it. The other type of books is just about, quote, how to be more creative, which I don't really know what that means. But what you don't find are books of models of creativity and what are the people who are being creative, what are they doing and how can you do it too? And that's what I've tried to do with the first 2 books in particular, which is, here's an example of an organization that's being about as creative as I think you can be. They touch on so many various forms of art and the arts. There's art, there's architecture, there's painting, there's lighting design, there's sound design, there's music, there's dialogue, there's environmental design, there's industrial design. There's so much to one of these attractions that it, to me, again, is sort of the best example of the epitome of creativity. And so if you have to be creative, and I think you do, to stay competitive in this world, why not look there for an example of how they do what they do?
Yeah.
Maybe they've already solved the problem that you have, but you just haven't looked there yet. You know, I think we often get trapped into staying in our own fields for insight, you know, and as I believe is, as a technical writer, if all I ever read is books about technical writing, I'm only going to get so much better. But if I read a book about something else, whatever it is, whatever it might be, creativity or Imagineering or whatever, maybe I'll get an insight that helps me understand and figure out a way to solve a problem differently.
Yeah.
So,
And I wholeheartedly agree with that. And that's what I, on an individual level, am experiencing right now as well, like kind of branching out into other areas and finding ways to incorporate everything something you read from another area, and how can you apply that to your existing knowledge base. So I agree wholeheartedly with that, and appreciate you saying that. The rapid questions, they're, you can explain things if you want. You don't have to give any explanation at all. But they're most of them are based on the parks. And so if you're ready to get started, we'll go ahead and get started.
Sure. Let's give it a shot.
So I wanted to first ask about favorite park. And by that, I mean, if you have been to if you've been to Walt Disney World, Disneyland, any of the international properties, is there a favorite property that you have been to?
Okay, so I have been to Disneyland once in the 90s for a single day, but I've been to Disney World about 10 times. So my answers are going to largely be based on my experience with Disney World. Okay. And right now, I think this is a tough one for me, but it's between the two kingdoms at Walt Disney World. The Magic Kingdom, because it is by far the most nurturing and reassuring and magical of all of them. But Animal Kingdom is such a glorious example of Imagineering and creativity. And between Expedition Everest, which is probably my favorite attraction in the whole resort, the Avatar and the Pandora and that land is just breathtaking. I have not been in Galaxy's Edge yet, so you know, maybe next time I go, I'll completely change my mind and it'll be Hollywood Studios because of Galaxy's Edge. I don't know for sure, but right now it's between those two. You know, if I had to only pick those two parks, it would be those two.
Okay.
If I had to choose between them, it would probably be Magic Kingdom.
Okay.
Because Cinderella Castle is magical to me. I think I could sit and watch it for an hour and not be bored.
Yeah.
You know, So.
And my next question actually was your favorite ride. So if Expedition Everest is your favorite ride, what's your number 2 on the list?
Well, if I were to go by park, I could tell you again, not counting Hollywood, not counting Galaxy's Edge, Expedition Everest definitely in Animal Kingdom, the Haunted Mansion at Magic Kingdom, Twilight Zone Tower of Terror at Hollywood Studios, and at Epcot it's challenging. I'm torn because I want to say Figment because I love Figment, but that attraction is really not that great. But I actually, you know what? Frozen Ever After is amazing.
Yeah.
Now I think about it.
Frozen Ever After, the retheming they did there is amazing. Maelstrom was one of my favorite rides.
But yeah, but
And
it's so
to
much better.
see,
Frozen Ever After is so much better.
yeah, I mean, to see what they've done with virtually I mean, I think it actually step for step is the same track.
Right.
It's just,
They changed the load area and unload
yeah.
area, but aside from that, the change, the switchback and all that other stuff, and the backwards and the waterfall, all that stuff's the same way it's always been. So
Yeah. Do you have a favorite show in any of the parks that you've been to?
I love Mickey's PhilharMagic.
Okay. All right. Anywhere in the Walt Disney World resorts or the property or Disneyland property, if you've stayed in any of those, do you have a favorite hotel or resort?
We tend to stay at the All-Star resorts.
Okay. All right.
Because you might be able to tell, I don't want to spend much time anywhere else aside from the parks. And so if all we're going to do is shower and sleep in one pace and eat maybe breakfast, maybe dinner from time to time, we haven't found it worth spending 2 to 3 times the cost to stay at even a moderate or deluxe place, because we're not spending any time at the resort. If I was going long enough and spend some time at the resort, I would love to stay at Animal Kingdom Lodge with the Savannah view.
Yeah.
I'd love to check out the Wilderness Lodge, but we tend to gravitate towards All-Star Music and All-Star Movies.
Okay.
Because they still have a lot of Disney fun and energy, and you still feel Disney, but it's $120 a night. It's pretty hard to argue from the economic point of view.
Do you have a favorite restaurant anywhere on properties? That could be in the parks, any of the resorts, or Disney Springs, or downtown Disney and Disneyland.
That is a good one. We enjoy the Liberty Tree Tavern.
Okay.
For family style. The other, we also like the Coral Reef.
Okay.
Those two are probably the 2 big ones.
Okay. And a favorite snack in the parks?
Oh, Mickey Mouse ice cream bars.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
That's typically the one that I go with every time.
I've struggled with only because as I grow older, I've grown a little less tolerant of lactose and dairy, so it's a little bit of a struggle, but I power through because it's too awesome. Plus, now you can buy them at home.
And now that you can buy them and they taste
pretty close,
pretty close to what you get in the parks. Yeah. Now that you can buy them at home, you can get into a little bit of trouble with that.
Yeah.
So kind of based on what you have studied extensively, what you've written about, what's your favorite, and you could even give 2 or 3 for this, your favorite environment or theme? So that, what I mean is, like, that would be for a land or potentially even an attraction that has a completely immersive area or queue. Do you have a favorite environment or theme in the parks?
That's a really good one. I think Pandora is right near the top, just because it's just so full of wonder. And when I think of Pandora and the attractions, I think of sort of the emotional composition of them. I think it's interesting because I think Flight of Passage is sort of a combination of exhilaration and wonder in terms of the emotions that you feel, right? Whereas Navi River Journey is sort of serenity or tranquility and wonder. And I think I see wonder sort of as being this unifying overall emotional palette of that land, just with the floating mountains, and it's just awe-inspiring to me. So I think that's probably the one, like if I had to pick a land to hang out in and just look around in, for a couple hours. Like you said, you have 2 hours and you can be in any land, but that's all you can do is just be in the environment. That's probably the one I would pick, just because there's so much to see and so much to take in.
Okay. And we talked about retheming briefly earlier. Is there either favorite or a retheme that you think that catches your eye that the Imagineers have done an exceptional job with, or your favorite one?
I think we talked about earlier, Frozen Ever After. I think, there was a lot of controversy about it. I personally believe that there's probably a lot more to the story about why Frozen was put there than most fans will ever know.
Yeah.
I don't think it's just to stick Frozen in the parks, because there's other ways they could have done that, and they have done that. You can do a sing-along, there's shows, other ways that they can bring Frozen to life in the parks. I think there were more factors at play, whether they're long-time rumors of mold buildup that had happened inside Maelstrom, because it's such a moist environment, like maybe, or just that it had low capacity and they just needed to add more capacity. I think there's more to it, and I think they did a fantastic job. It's a really great experience. So that's certainly one. Trying to think of others. Less happy with what they did with Figment, but it is better than the interim one that didn't have Figment at all. The Seas, I think, is an interesting case, because I don't know if you ever went when it was the Living Seas, but what's interesting to me is they sort of flipped the nature of the pre-show and post-show. So in the original version, the movie and the hydrolators and the sea cabs were all the pre-show, and the show was Sea Base Alpha. That was the main thing to see. Now, the ride, the short little ride through the Nemo thing, is the show, and Sea Base Alpha is an elaborate post-show.
Yeah. So
it's kind of an interesting sort of flipping of that whole experience, and how we take in the various pieces of it. So yeah, those are probably the ones that I would think about. I mean, trying to think of others. I enjoyed Alien Extraterrestrial Encounter. I think it was a great ride. I do think it was a little intense for Magic Kingdom, but it was a great attraction. It was far better than Stitch's Great Escape. So.
And the last one, what stands out to you and it could be something big, something small. What stands out to you as most creative outcome that Imagineering has produced? Again, it could be something as big as an attraction or a land. It could be something as small as a sign. Something that you feel is just kind of that great example of imagination and creativity from the Imagineering.
I think it's Expedition Everest. I think that is one of the best examples. And again, having not done Rise of the Resistance or any of this new stuff that I've heard fantastic things about, Expedition Everest, in terms of the setting, the story, the execution, the ride experience, it's got it all. It's a different experience at night than it is in the day, vastly. I don't know if you've done it at night, but it's I don't know if it's better, but it's definitely cool. It's definitely equally cool, and they're both worthwhile. Issues with the Yeti notwithstanding, I would love to see the Yeti moving, but I also believe that it's such a small percentage and part of the overall experience that I don't think that it diminishes the ride in any way.
Yeah.
The ride could have always been the way it is now, and it still would be a fantastic experience.
Yeah. I have never seen what it originally was. It adds more to the experience for me to know the story of the Yeti and the back. That's one of those things that it just adds to that person who wants to know that information that information is there for them.
Right. Yeah.
So it's awesome. Lou, I want to thank you for talking with us. This was a fascinating discussion, and sometime I'll have to pick your brain about all of the research you've done about Imagineering and the creative process. Anyone who wants to follow you or engage with you, social media or otherwise, how are they able to do that?
So I'm on Twitter at Lou Prosperi. I'm on Facebook at Lou Prosperi. I have a blog where it's called the Imagineering Toolbox, where I post about not only applying Imagineering outside, but sometimes just about Imagineering. For instance, I just recently did a whole series of blog posts about, it's called A Visual Companion to Tell Your Story, the Walt Disney World Way, where I have pictures of all the attractions and examples from the book. The pictures that I took that I used as reference, I also, so, for instance, I think you said you were in Adventureland. So when you get to the Pirates of the Caribbean attraction, the post about that is a picture of the jail scene as well as the pirate chess scene, because those are the two examples that I talk about, So I just did a whole series of blog posts there. I have a new one that's going to go up about the Millennium Falcon and Galaxy's Edge. Even though I haven't been there, I just finished reading The Art of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, a new coffee table art book that just came out. And there's a fascinating little tidbit about the Millennium Falcon and how it serves as a weenie, even though you can't see it when you walk in.
Yeah.
But because it's there,
yeah,
it pulls you in.
Yep.
Right. And so it's a whole different kind of weenie, which is this, what is it? Concept weenie, cognitive weenie? I don't know what to call it. But it's kind of a fascinating thing that, what we traditionally think of as a visual thing. And in my books, I talk about auditory weenies too, like at Test Track. As you get closer, when you hear the track, when you hear the car, I think it draws the audience in the same way. I think when you walk by the bakery and you smell the cookies, I think that works like a weenie too. But those that traditionally engage the senses, I think this idea that something cool is there to be found draws you in is an interesting sort of take on the weenie. So I have a new post that's going to go up sometime this week about that.
Okay.
That address there is imagineeringtoolbox.wordpress.com.
Okay. And I've been to Galaxy's Edge once. That's very true about the Millennium Falcon. Like, you are exploring, searching for wherever that is.
On the hunt for it as soon as you get there, right?
And whenever you see it, I mean, as a Star Wars fan, that's the only time they've built two complete full-size Millennium Falcons, and you're looking at one of them when you're in one of the parks. It's amazing. So well, thanks again, Lou. This was awesome, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you.